to order, and we'll take roll call visit to make certain we have a quorum. Nancy Crowley
Here.
and Liz Cobbs.
Here, sorry, that was needed.
That's and Bill Marachek. So we're present. We have a quorum, and before we meet Joellen, Amy, you wanted to just sort of give us some thoughts that we should be perhaps thinking about during the presentation.
Good. Thank you, Bill. Appreciate that. So I try to make sure as we enter a topic in a meeting that we think about the context in which the board is acting and point out any relevant sections of the personnel bylaw and how we're applying those. So I just wanted to make sure that you all understand that as we approach a class and comp study, you, the board, are acting within two sections in particular of the bylaw. Section 5, which is about the classification plan, and Section 6, which is about the compensation plan. And I don't want to detract from the whole presentation here, but a couple things to think about as you go forward is that the bylaw requires that there be a uniform system for grouping positions based on the nature and complexity of duties assigned and minimum qualifications to perform those duties. So we've had that. We talk about that in meetings regularly. And this is re-looking at that. So that's one of the things we want to listen for is, how we'll be doing that going forward. Also, the under the compensation plan, the bylaw talks about periodic review of the compensation plan, and that there are several factors that the board shall take into account and give such weight as it may deem appropriate to. And those that are listed in the bylaw are the rates of pay for like positions in other Massachusetts town considered by the personnel board to be comparable to Concord, rates of pay for like jobs, if any, in commercial and business establishments in the area of Concord and vicinity, and the current level of the consumer price index for urban wage earners and clerical workers, Boston, Massachusetts. Now, I note that some of those may come into play in a full study. Some of them are more about what we do every single year, which is we continue to look at pay rates and consider those factors along with the budget. But at the end, after Joellen's presentation, what I think that the board needs to think about is the approach for confirming what data will be used, in particular for the compensation plan, the confirming the comparable communities that will be considered and any other data, so that the board can be sure that that information is provided to our consultants as we do this. And so it might be that the board ultimately votes on the specific list, or it talks about the concepts, and then perhaps the chair votes that the chair will make that final decision. But that's something that we'll need to circle back to, and it doesn't all have to be tonight, but that's where we're headed, and we need to get to soon in order to really be getting the important data here. So that was what I wanted to introduce about the context, and happy to turn it over to Joellen if you're ready, Bill.
Well, I think what I'd like to do just preliminarily is Nancy and Liz, you've met Kelly Hebert, I think. Haven't Kelly, you've met both Liz and Nancy?
I think that I have, maybe not in person.
Okay, well, that's
Kelly, not in person, but I know that you attended one of 2 meetings ago, I think, right? And
Yes,
we met you then.
Yeah.
You just started and you were telling us your background with other towns and all the work you've done in other communities as well.
Yes, exactly. So we have met through Zoom, and hopefully one of these days soon we'll get to meet face to face.
Yeah, well, right,
God willing.
That would be nice. I just wanted to make certain that not that we have to acknowledge or recognize everybody who's on this call, but that or who's listening to the call, but that Kelly is the project leader, so she is the one who is going to be guiding the process and is the sort of the, I think of the as the key go-to person for Joellen. And I think is a vital part to the success of, will be a vital part to the success of the project. And before Joellen starts, I'd like to just maybe let Nancy Crowley and Liz Cobbs sort of each briefly talk about their background, experience, and that way I think it may help Joellen just understand how the personnel board at this point is composed. I've had the opportunity to do that previously, so nobody needs to hear that from me. So Nancy, do you want to start?
Sure. Well, I was born and raised in West Concord. I went to the Hobby Wheeler schools and then off to Rose Hawthorne, where I graduated from high school. I went into nursing. I went to Mount Auburn Hospital in Cambridge and got my RN and got my BS in Management and Organizational Behavior from Lesley College. I'm also a certified dementia practitioner, which I still use. I worked in a lot of management positions from health and healthcare settings. I worked at Emerson Hospital for over 18 years in many, many departments. I started several Alzheimer units in some of the nursing homes around. I was a clinical coordinator for a nursing agency. Also was a reservist IFWS flight nurse for Hanscom. And after all of that, I wound up being the executive director of Concord Park Assisted Living, Independent Assisted Living with an Alzheimer's unit in West Concord, which opened in 2001. So for the executive director there, I mean, I was responsible for just about every department and every staff member, and of course, every resident. It was, I must say, I kept on saying, I didn't know why I took it. It was just, I didn't feel that I was really, that was maybe for me. But it was 13 absolutely incredible years. I loved what I did. I've always loved most of my nursing. And then I stayed with the company, Senior Living Residences, and I went to about 6 years ago to the corporate part as the corporate nurse. And I was responsible for the director of quality improvement, education, and most important, regulatory compliance. So I really stayed with them doing all of that. We had 18 communities at the time, and that was my responsibility for all of 18. And it was from risk management to human resources to everything. So I retired. It was hard when I first retired. But, I do belong to a fair amount of boards and committees, so that does keep me busy. And so that's that. So.
All right. Thank you, Nancy. Thank you. And then Liz, would you please just a little bit about you and your background?
Sure. And I'm on mute most of the time because I am trying to take notes and make sure that we get this all down. And Nancy, I didn't hear you clearly on everything, so please make sure to check over your history in the meeting minutes when they come back out, okay?
Okay, great.
All right, sorry about that. I type very loudly, I guess.
Oh.
So my name is Elizabeth Cobbs, and I moved to Concord 2 years ago after retiring from Merck & Co. Incorporated, so the US Merck, not the German Merck, where I spent 19 years. I spent those years in health policy in the United States, but mainly in Japan. And I set up there Merck's first policy office and market access. So we did research and negotiated with the government in Japan as a one-payer health system. Negotiated pricing, negotiated lots of different regulatory issues, and also worked in policy areas specifically around vaccination schedules in Japan to open that program. After that, I moved with Merck to Europe, and I took a regional role. I wasn't as much in policy, but was doing a lot of work to develop the team in Europe, to do market access research, which is a very industry-specific term, to do research that's not the clinical trials, but trials and studies that you do after that to look at the effectiveness of medicines in real life settings. So I handled that team, and then I moved back to the US, where they asked me to, from the headquarters, to actually put together a global team. So I built a global team that for the first time for another area of Merck, and had the real pleasure of working with people from Brazil to Korea, and putting those teams together. In fact, had a reunion call this morning, and they're all doing pretty well. So I spent 19 years with Merck. Prior to that, I was in academia. So it was a big transition, a lot of HR work in the various teams that I built across the world, dealing with, compensation, obviously, and all of those things in a global setting, meaning everybody had different laws, regulations, et cetera. So always a big part of management is this piece, and I'm really delighted to have an opportunity to support Concord on this committee. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you all. So I think now it's time for Joellen. Could you sort of introduce yourself, Joellen, and a little bit about your background, and then we can let you get to your presentation.
Of course, and I'm sorry I have the sun coming in. There's really nothing I could do about that. So I know it looks a little off, but good afternoon, everyone. I'm Joellen Catamartori, and I co-own GovHR USA with my female business partner, Heidi Voorhees, and we have been doing consulting work together since 2011. But prior to that, I spent about 24 years serving local governments in 3 different states: in Massachusetts for about 17 years, in North Carolina for about 3.5, and then I finished up in Evanston, Illinois, for about 4 years. So my roles in local government were always in general management, assistant, administrator, HR director type roles in local government. And then I transitioned into consulting, and I've been doing it ever since. And for GovHR, we have different practice areas. We do general recruiting in local government. We do HR consulting, management consulting, professional development, and we have a separate temporary staffing firm called GovTemps USA. So we kind of do a soup to nuts approach. We only work with local governments. That's the space we work in. That's what our professional backgrounds are. As you'll see as we go through this study, we will bring in more consultants to help us when we work with all of the Concord employees, and they all have backgrounds in local government. So it's nice because even though I haven't worked for the town of Concord, I've worked in local government. I know what the jobs are, but we will get to know your community, and the people that your employees will have the opportunity to interact with do have that type of background as well. So while it's not exactly the same, the jargon's there, the experience is there. So I think that they'll benefit from that. So we just look forward to working with you. This is a process. It's a large study. There are many moving parts, but I'll give you an overview today. And then of course, I'm happy to answer any questions that you have. So should I proceed?
Please proceed. Yes.
Okay. So today I have an overview. So I think what was mentioned when I first jumped on the call was the first kickoff meeting that was today, and that was very in-depth about one portion of the study. So I will talk about that, but I'm going to talk about the whole study. So I'm going to talk about the project components. I'll talk about the benefits of doing a study like this, for the town. What's going to happen once GovHR is out of the picture and the aftermath, where are we now? And then of course, I'll answer any questions that you have. So there's 2 main components to this study. The first part of it is the whole analysis of the market. And then the second part is the internal equity or the development of a new classification plan. So what we're working on right now, so maybe some of this will be redundant when I get to that, is developing comparable communities. So we've already gone through an analysis of comparable communities to Concord. And what we do when we look at that analysis in Massachusetts, every state has similar criteria, but not every state has the same sourced information. And when we go through this analysis, it's really important for us to be able to say, we get this from the Department of Revenue. So if somebody wants to look it up, they can actually look up how we came up with our our recommendation. So we do look at population and proximity. We have those parameters, but in addition to that, we look at other financial criteria. We look at your per capita income, your equalized value per capita, your total assessed value, your total budget, the tax levy, and your state aid. And they have different weights, like state aid doesn't weigh as heavily, as your total equalized assessed value. So we go through an analysis and we're determining comparable communities. So we've started that. But the other thing that makes this study a little bit unique is the fact that you have a light plant. So we had a conversation about several things yesterday, and we decided to run some other communities in Massachusetts that wouldn't normally make that initial screening because of proximity and maybe even population, through your analysis to see where that measure of comparability is, because we may have to be strategic in where we get some data for certain portions of the study, because that is a unique entity to Concord, and not every community in Massachusetts has that type of service. So that's one part of it. Once we go through that analysis, we'll develop a survey, and we will get information from the market. So because you have close to 150 classifications in this study, we have to do a little bit more than a traditional survey, because if we do a salary survey, we usually include up to about 40 positions, and we really want a lot more data than 40 positions. So we've been strategizing about what tools we can use in order to get additional data. So we're working on that now, and there'll be more to come on the approach we'll have to get information from the market. When we do this, we don't normally go outside the municipal world. We can get some data points from other databases, but we don't necessarily go into the private sector. And the reasons for that is because it's very difficult to get the data. I mean, my primary reason is because there's no way to get into the finances of companies. It's not public information to determine that level of comparability to Concord, that ability to pay. So that's the primary reason. The secondary reason is they don't have to give us any information. And when I've done this before for clients, and even though I say I'll be happy to report anonymously, company A, company B, it's just very difficult to do it. So it's hard to get the information. It's hard to make it relevant. So we generally stay in the municipal space when we look at comparable communities. So that's the compensation side. On the classification side, today we had our first employee kickoff meeting, and that's where we bring the employees in to provide us input in order for us to do a job factor analysis. So there's a meeting, 2 more meetings next week to do the exact same presentation. It was recorded today, so if you can't make one of the meetings next week, or watch it on Zoom or come in person, you can watch the recording if you want to have my presentation. We also have a pre-recorded version of the meeting in the event somebody wants to. It's a little bit more abbreviated if somebody wanted to take a look at that. So what we did today was we did an overview of the study. I talked generally about what the study was about with the employees. And then I went into a lot of detail about our tool that we use to complete our job factor analysis. And we get information through the use of a questionnaire, which is called a job analysis questionnaire. And so we refer to it as a JAQ. So if you hear that, that's what we're talking about. And so we have every employee who's in a position covered by the study. We want them all to fill out this questionnaire. And in the questionnaire, it's a review of the current job description. So it's the opportunity for people to update their job descriptions if necessary. And then they answer several questions related to job factors. And the system that GovHR has created, it's our system. We have 9 different job factors. And so every job has a response to every factor. So there's a factor about education and training, a factor about experience needed to perform the work, judgment, overall judgment and decision-making, which gets to work complexity, whether or not the position has responsibility for the development of policies, procedures, guidelines, Whether or not, what latitude does somebody have in planning their own workday, and do they have to plan the work of others? So it gets into kind of the scope of responsibility for strategic direction and things of that nature. What type of contact are people having with each other and other stakeholders, whether they're residents, developers, other units of government, vendors, things like that. Supervision, whether or not the position supervises, what are the physical demands in the work environment, which correlates with ADA requirements, that we have all of that information in job description. And then we talk about technological aptitude, whether it relates to the use of computers or equipment. So those are our 9 job factors. And I explained to the employees, there's different levels within each factor. They check a level that they feel is appropriate. We talk about it. We get supervisor input, and then we do an interview for each position, and then we score those questionnaires, and that develops your classification plan. So that takes some time, but the thing that's important, there's 2 things. One is the classification plan establishes internal equity for the town, which is good. And the second part of it is it's unique to Concord, because I'm sure you've heard this, employees will say to you, if I went to work today, I use the example of Lexington. If I went to Lexington and had the same job title, I might not have some of the same essential functions. So it allows us to really get into the detail about how work is performed in Concord, and then that way we can classify the jobs appropriately. So it's a very objective way to assess the position requirements. The other thing that we tell employees, that's what the study is. The study is a look of the position, the requirements to do the work, to be hired into the position, and whether or not the pay is competitive. That's it. It's very objective. We're not looking at performance. We're not looking at staffing levels, efficiency, anything like that. We're simply looking at the position, the requirements. Is the job classified correctly, and is the pay competitive? So those are the 2 major components of the study. And then just benefits, when you think about, well, why would you spend the money on something like this? There's lots of benefits. One thing is we're looking at that comparability of communities, and that can help you for union or non-union. If you have this group of communities that is based on primarily financial criteria that you're getting from the Department of Revenue, that's a nice baseline for you to consider and use going forward. And the analysis that we go through, you can always rerun it in subsequent years to make sure you have the same comps. Thinking about where you're located in Massachusetts, I don't know how much more growth Concord will have, or the other communities that are considered your comps now, but in a few years, you can always look at it again to make sure that list is still your viable list. The internal equity is hugely important to make sure that the jobs that have the similar complexity overall are assigned to the same grade. And making it unique to the town is very beneficial too, because all of those nuances that come into the fact that you have some positions that don't even exist in other communities. So when we think about making a recommendation for a pay range, if we can't get data for a particular position, we can still make a recommendation on a pay range because of internal equity. If we know that a job is assigned to grade 7, for example, and we have data for other positions in grade 7 and grade 8 and grade 6, we know that all of the positions in grade 7, because of internal equity, should have the same pay range. So that's another benefit. And then pay equity happens by virtue of the fact that you establish internal equity, which goes hand in hand with the Massachusetts Pay Equity Act. So when that law was enacted, we've been doing these studies in Massachusetts for a long time. It complies with the spirit of that law. Because you're establishing your internal equity, you then have pay equity. So they go hand in hand. So that's another benefit. Your pay competitiveness will be there because you're looking at what the other communities are doing. And you'll also have a conversation about your pay philosophy. So we've already talked about that, but that will be something that will be considered going forward, which was already highlighted. And then the durability of the system. If you maintain the system, we will take a lot of time and effort to put together a new classification plan, establish those comparable communities, and make recommendations for you. We also have recommendations in the report about how you maintain the classification plan going forward and the compensation plan. And as long as that happens, it should last you a long time, 5, 10 years or more. So it will stand the test of time. I've been doing these for many years. We have the same system. I've done it around the United States in lots of different states. I've done this type of work at Council of Governments as well as local governments, and it's applicable everywhere. So that's positive as well. And then the aftermath. So at some point you're going to get a report, and it'll be a draft of the final report. So I never give a client a report and say, here you go, done, and go away. I say, here you go, pretty much done. Give us the feedback. Like, let's get some feedback. Let's see if anything needs to be tweaked. And once we have that final feedback, we finalize the report. And then we provide, support to you for at least a year or so for no additional charge, because it's important for me that you know how to use the system. So if you have to classify a job 6 months after we're finished, and somebody sends me an email and says, hey, Joellen, we just did this, we think it should go into this grade, what do you think? I'm happy to help. I think that's important, again, for the durability, but also for the comfort of the staff, knowing how to use the system. And I can tell you, all of you will be expert at this by the end of this project, because it's very hands-on and there's a lot of data. So we will be talking about how we're making recommendations and why we're saying positions should go into different grades. So it is hands-on, and you'll be very comfortable using it once the project is concluded. And then you get some materials from us as well. There is a compensation class and comp manual that has been written. I wrote a manual that accompanies the system that talks about what it is and all of the different factors, what they mean. You'll have the job analysis questionnaires. I even have another one for seasonal positions if you ever wanted to use it for that. And then you'll have all of the scoring tools. So that all comes as a result of the project. You'll actually have it before it's concluded, because you want to be familiar with it as we're doing our analysis, and you'll be trained on it. So I don't know how much more training I'll have to do, because we're going to spend so much time together. People will be pretty comfortable with it. And so where are we now? We are reviewing the comps, as I mentioned. We are considering running more through because of the fact that you have the light plant. We're in the process of conducting the kickoff meeting. So again, we had one today. We have 2 next week. We're determining benchmark positions. What can we get from the Mass Municipal HR Association as benchmark data? What do we have to put together for a survey? We're probably going to do a separate one for the light plant. So we're being very strategic on how we're going to gather that information. So we're developing benchmarks for a survey, and then we're using strategy to figure out what's the best way to get as much data as possible to analyze on the compensation side. And then we're also developing our interview schedules. So I've gone through all the positions based on the distribution list for all the employees that are covered by the study. And then we're putting together our interview schedules and assigning our consultants, in different areas of expertise. And our hope is to get that to the town probably right after Labor Day, hopefully next week, to start populating those. We're not doing interviews until the end of October, but I think because it's a large study, the more time the staff has, whether it's the week after Labor Day or the following week, that'll be helpful, because it will require coordination with supervisors and employees to get everybody scheduled. So that's an overview of what we're doing. I have the job analysis questionnaire actually attached to this, but going through that, it requires a lot of conversation and a lot of detail. And if you do come to one of the kickoff meetings, you'll have the benefit of the presentation that I made today that does go into that level of detail about the different job factors.
All right, thank you. Nancy or Liz, do you have any questions of Joellen at this point? I mean, there's probably going to be more time here, but I just wanted to pause and just see if Nancy or Liz, you had any questions at this point. So Nancy, you got your hand raised, please.
Nancy, you're on mute though.
That does help. I just wanted to say I was on today, so I was very impressed. I thought it was extremely, job analysis is very comprehensive. It was very, very well done. So I took, I took down some notes, but I have the whole thing that you sent anyways, but I thought it was very, very good. Certainly, will take time for some employees to be able to do that analysis because it's very comprehensive. So I don't have any questions right now.
Okay. Liz, do you have anything to?
Just a comment, and building really off what Nancy just stated, that, the job, Amy sent out the employee questionnaire, so it's quite comprehensive, as Nancy stated. And I wonder if their groups will answer that, or are you expecting each individual to answer? Because sometimes I think they won't all know all of the information, right? So maybe a division or a group, a team might be answering those questions together. How does it usually work, Joellen?
So we like to give everyone the opportunity to answer the questionnaire, and allow that individual employee to provide their perception of the work. Sometimes you have people that share a job title. Somebody might be newer to the position, somebody might be very seasoned, and they may have different perceptions about it. What I did today is I go through a lot of detail about where a position should really fall organizationally. So there's some factors like the planning factor that if the person is not in a supervisory position, they should not check level 3 or higher, because it only pertains to a job that has that, that requirement. So I've had it done both ways. I've had, when I've done some group interviews and I look at the questionnaires and they're exactly the same. And they said, well, we wanted to do it together,
Yeah.
So I'm okay either way, but we want people to have the opportunity to fill it out on their own. If they really feel like they have a title that they're sharing with someone and they're really doing the same work as their fellow employee and they want to work together, I think that's okay too. But we want to give everyone that opportunity to tell us what they think, because as you know, over time, jobs change. So an employee may say, I'm doing this today. And a supervisor might say, wow, maybe we do need to reclassify this job, or is it a function of somebody's initiative versus what's required? So it allows us to get through all of that. And it's really up to the individual employee. We want people to give us their own feedback. But again, if they feel comfortable doing it with a work colleague, we're not going to tell them they can't do that.
So another question, Joelle, given your experience in so many different states, I wonder if there are some key areas where either New England or Massachusetts seems to stand out, and there's areas of caution or subject areas that are distinct here, or in other states that are not distinct here, that might help us to understand how people approach this work from the response side.
So I think, it's the same everywhere as far as organizational structure, right? You have a hierarchy and structure. You have sometimes a chain of command. If you have ranks, we look at an entire rank as opposed to a specialty area. So that's kind of consistent. I think what's unique about New England is the number of departments that there are. When you go to other parts of the country, they have very strong counties where that's not the case in Massachusetts. And a lot of that work has been anything related to social services has been pushed down to the local level, has been at the local level in Massachusetts. That doesn't exist elsewhere. In other parts of the country, they have county assessing. They have some road functions at the county level. So what I find interesting in Massachusetts, and there's certain departments that I only do because I actually worked with them before. Like I don't have anybody at GovHR with all the people we have that's ever worked with a harbor master other than me. You don't have that, but I've done that, so it's unique in that sense, like having conservation. There are some functions that are a little bit unique, but the process really holds true wherever we go.
Okay,
I wanted
thank you.
to All right, Liz, did you finish? I don't want to, sorry. Okay.
I'll set.
Okay.
Thanks.
I just wanted to raise, I guess, a hypothetical and having to do with determining benchmark positions. And I'm gonna try to see if I use an example. Let's say there's a job called Alpha. And Alpha is a job that's also in other municipalities, those that are going to be comparable. But in Concord, we've got an entry level, we've got somebody who's, we're going to call senior, and we've got somebody who's a coordinator, and then somebody who's supervisor. So we've got four different classifications of job Alpha in Concord. So what's the mechanism to be able to determine the benchmark job?
So I've looked at all of your positions and we've had that conversation. And, you know, my thought is to find the ones that I know exist elsewhere. So you have a lot of very unique titles that really get to specificity of a position versus a more general title. So I would put the more general title in the survey, and we always define the job. So we don't just put a title in, we define the job. What's going to happen is we have to determine the classification plan. So we have to figure out where all the jobs are grading out. Once we figure that out and it looks good, then we may have a recommendation to consolidate a little bit on titles to make less alphas, maybe, if it makes sense to do so. So I can't tell you that until we do the analysis, but for the purposes of surveying, we're going to go with the broadest title, because if I go with a very unique title, chances are I'm not going to get data. The purpose is to get the data. So that's how we'll go about that.
I don't think I was clear enough, because I understand that part.
Okay.
It's trying, when you start to divide the job Alpha into various levels, because simply there's entry level people, there's people who've been there in job Alpha for a long time because their responsibilities are more. So when you send out a survey to other municipalities, how do you try to ensure that what you're saying is a benchmark job is going to be the same as thought by Lexington, Needham, as it is in actuality in Concord?
So I think, so I just want to make sure I'm clear. I think what you're saying is you have more than one person in the same classification, but they're at different points of their career in the same classification. Is that what you're
Right.
saying?
Yeah, the same.
Okay.
Right.
So there's a market value for a job. So that's what we're going to determine. We're going to determine a range. Now, where that person falls in the range based on their current pay might be different, but there's a market value for a position. So we'll determine that market value. An implementation strategy is then, what is the structure of your pay plan and where do people go into it based on longevity or what their current pay is now. So it's two separate things. That the classification is the classification. There will be people in that classification that are started yesterday and have 10 years, but there's always a range, there's a market value for that job, and that's what we have to determine. And then the implementation strategy is where they fall in the range.
Can I just,
Go ahead.
two things, Joanne, please correct me if I'm wrong, but from our conversations, I believe you use a common approach, which is to use sort of capsule descriptions. For one, when we send out the market data requests, we often would provide a small description so that we can tell those other communities what we are looking for. And it describes a certain level of a position. So that is one way to help control it, because it might look different in another position. In another community, I'm sorry. And then again, we have to be able to recognize when something is truly a different job, a different position, because the set of responsibilities is different with a person who is more experienced versus it's the same job with an experienced person in it.
Right.
That can be hard to follow and to kind of cull out sometimes, but sometimes there are clear differences.
And that's one of the things that we learn when we're setting up the interviews. So you might have people with the same classification right now, but something's morphed over time and we have to peel it off into something else. Like that, we'll learn that through the classification process. And if we didn't, if it say the job peels off into something else and we didn't anticipate it and we didn't get market data for that position, we can still make a recommendation on the pay range based on where it falls from an internal equity standpoint. So these are all things we'll learn as we go through the process.
So one final thing on Job Alpha. If Job Alpha has 5 people in Concord and there's 5 people in Lexington, are you looking, when you ask for the comparative data, salary data, are you asking for a mean? Are you asking for each individual separate salary, those 5 individually? What kind of mathematical technique are you using in order to get the 5 people?
So we're asking for the salary range. When we put out a salary survey, or if we pull data on our own, we want the minimum for the range and the maximum for the range and the actual salary if they have it. Now that gets a little trickier when you have multiple people in the same classification, but sometimes you don't. So we want to analyze salary range data. We don't want to analyze actual salaries because you don't know how long someone's been in a position, nor do you know the market conditions under which someone was hired. So a better gauge of the market value of the job is range. And
Right.
I would suspect that for the comps that you're going to have, they're mid-sized communities. There's range data out there. So that's what we will analyze. And then we will calculate that out into average and different percentiles to then discuss the pay philosophy, to then calculate new pay ranges.
Right. I'm trying just to, I don't mean to be belaboring this point, but earlier on in the presentation, Joellen, you talked about an employee being able to look to see if his or her job is competitive. They're being paid competitively. Well, but in essence, now what I understand is we're going to have ranges. You know, that's what you're asking for. I mean, asking from other municipalities. And that's going to be what's going to be created are the ranges. Have I got this right?
Yes, that's correct. We will create the ranges, but then the implementation is a different strategy.
Right.
You know, right.
Okay.
But we will make a recommendation for a pay range for each grade in the classification plan.
Okay.
Can
Can
I
I start? Yes. Amy?
Sorry, I just wanted to make one more note related to light plants. Because of the organizational structure, a lot of the light plants, they are less likely to have ranges. So it's always a challenge to fit that data in. So we'll have to have some conversations about how to address that, given the different organizational structures there.
Yeah, and sometimes, like I'm working with the community in Michigan right now, and I was looking at their data today, and they only have actual salaries. You know, I think, you know, of most of the communities that are the comps, I think one is reporting range and the rest are reporting actual. So when something like that happens, we will create a range off the actuals. If so we can deal with the light plant if we have to go down that road. There's ways to do it that will make a range that will be relevant for Concord.
Okay. Did by chance anything spark in terms of questions from Nancy or Liz? Any additional ones? Okay.
No, I have just a comment, Bill. I think that was an important fact to get in the minutes of this meeting is that one of the outputs is really those ranges, because we don't want, you know, it has to be that there's movement, there's ability to move
Mhm.
within a position based on experience and skills and all the things that Joellen, you have in your interview query. So I think that's really significant. I think creating those ranges for the light plant, if we haven't had those before, is really an important factor here. So for the same reason that you want to have people to have a range so that they can understand there's growth and there's opportunity. And, you know, I think that gets to an earlier conversations. And Joellen, I'm newest on this board, so I have the least experience. But from my short time on with the group, it seems to me that motivation, and especially, you know, as we all know, with people leaving jobs and so forth, with open positions that we have in the town, motivation is certainly something we want to focus on and ensure that this program actually supports that going forward, right? That this gives us a way to be more transparent, but also develop more trust and enthusiasm, if those are the right ways to look at it, with town employees, so that we know, you know, with confidence, and they feel that we know with confidence based on this report. So there's quite a bit, you know, that will come from this. And you know, as Nancy mentioned too, she was able to attend your meeting today. I think that's excellent, that it's having such a comprehensive review opportunity right now, and that hopefully will, with the personnel board and other institutions for the town, will be able to use this information in ways that really foster, you know, that more positive environment for Concord employees. So I'll get off my grandstand now. Thank you.
Okay, well, no, that's good. That's very good. Joellen or Amy, do you have anything else that we need to, or that Joellen, because we don't need to have her stay if we've sort of what you thought was important to let the personnel board and those in the community who are listening hear.
No, not specifically for Joellen. It's just making sure, again, what I talked about before Joellen started, which is it's important that the personnel board consider, as you're moving forward right now, the requirements under the personnel bylaw that I reviewed on the classification plan, section 5, compensation plan, section 6, and that we have direction through this meeting of how you're guiding this study, or, you know, what methodology they were going to use to finalize the list of comparable communities, that sort of thing. I don't know that Joellen needs to stay on for that. She'll certainly need to be involved in the final results. But.
Well, I think, you know, because of the fact that the citizens of the town are also an important element within the whole, you know, reason why there's a personnel board, maybe it might be appropriate now, just on the presentation given by Joellen, if there's any public question or comment, I'll entertain any members of the public to speak.
And Bill, I don't know if you can see, but Mark Howell had his hand risen. And
No,
he's
I can't. So
okay, so
let's go with Mr. Howell. That'd be great.
Thank you very much. I did have a couple of questions specifically about the study and the goals, and I apologize if these might have been covered at other points, but just some thoughts that came up from the presentation. It seems I understood that the presentation was very much about the mechanics and the conduct of the study, and that's important to understand. But I think from the personnel board's perspective on policy issues, it makes sense to also think about what the expectations of the outcomes of the study are and the implementation in terms of recruiting success for the town, employee retention, turnover, and full employment. So I'm wondering if some of those factors are also included in the, you know, when we go to compare ourselves with other communities, are we also looking at how those communities are doing in terms of keeping employees, attracting employees? It seems to me that it'd be interesting to have some kind of strategic positioning that reflects the overall state of local municipal staffing in terms of the current job market environment and how the results might work to enhance Concord's community, Concord's strategic positioning vis-a-vis other communities in recruiting and retention. So I'm wondering if you can comment on that. And then I had two sort of specific things, particularly on the light plant. I'm wondering whether, because most of the investor-owned utilities are in fact, regulated utilities, whether they could be compelled or at least approached to provide information about some of their positions, because clearly line workers and things like that is the competition for those folks. And lastly, this is a little bit more down in the mechanics, but will the job classifications that result, factors that come out of this, be clearly enough defined that, say, a department head or a supervisor might be able to largely classify a position that they were considering creating in the future? So is there a toolkit that helps as new positions need to be created and classified that can be used more broadly? My experience with the system is that it was a little bit of a black box and it was hard to do that. So happy to hear your comments on any of those points. Thank you very much for allowing me to ask my questions.
On the retention piece, we did talk a little bit about that. We are looking at classification and compensation, but there's a lot of strategies that go along with the whole comprehensive compensation package. So we will talk about that. Some of it's probably a little bit beyond the scope of the study, but I have a lot of experience with it. So I'm happy to engage in conversations with the town about that. As far as the light plant is concerned, I've had, it's a little sticky trying to get information from any private companies. We have not had success in that. Sometimes there's cooperatives and other municipal light plants. So we will certainly go there first. Sometimes in working with light plant professionals, they have some information that might be of use to us as well. So if we can get any information like that, we'll certainly take a look at it, because when you think about who is your competition, it's very much the private sector as well as the public sector for that type of work, so that people do go in and out of those sectors when they do that work, and we're aware of it. And as far as the future is concerned, with regard to classifications, yes, the town will have the whole system in order to classify jobs in the future. So if a job needs to be created or reclassified, the town will be able to maintain the system.
Amy, do you have anything to add to Joellen's?
I'll just observe that I think that the system that Joellen has presented looks a little more user-friendly, easier to use than the one that we have had. And I am optimistic that is going to make it an easier system to maintain and be clearer to the managers and employees, as Mark mentioned, in what makes a difference.
Okay, I think it's important. Yes.
Sorry, Bill, I have another question or comments. And it comes from the discussion, and I think that Mark Howell's comments were terrific. So thanks for that, Mark. One thing that led me to think about is, Joellen, your comment that we have so many different levels and positions here that are unique. Not in the light plant sense of that, but in the sense that there are so many in the range, right? And I wonder, I've been through many where we had to reclassify things, which are very painful processes for many employees, right? Where their titles change and so forth. But if we have gotten down to some minute a level, is one of your recommendations, have you ever had to recommend you've got to recategorize and limit the number of levels in positions, because if we've gone too far in that direction, sometimes you do need a correction.
Right.
Do you have experience with that?
Yes, yes, all the time. So I mean, I think that's one of the things that we talk about as far as study expectations. And if we end up with a lot of positions in the same grade and there's all these different titles, or two positions, say one is reclassifying and it has the same title and it ends up in two different grades and it makes sense that it's happening that way, then we have to recommend a title change, because you can't have two titles that are different in two different grades. So yes, that the organizational analysis piece is a side benefit of this, but I really can't comment on it until we see how everything grades out. And then I think that's what, working with the project team and with you, saying this is probably what a better title is. The other thing, again, it goes to implementation strategy, so sometimes if things do need to change a little bit, you may want to implement now, or you may want to hold on making some changes in the, until maybe somebody, the position changes over or something like that. So there's lots of different ways to do that. But the answer to your question is yes, I've had to do it multiple times. And it just depends on how things look once we do our initial classification plan development, and then having discussions about what's the best way to implement it.
All right, that take care. Okay, thank you, Liz.
Oh, sorry.
Kelly? Yep.
Kelly has, okay, I didn't know if you could say it.
Thank you. Yes, the discussion stimulated another comment that I just wanted to make with regards to, it's actually with regards to the approach that GovHR is using and the analysis we're sort of going through right now in terms of what are the comp communities. I was going to ask Joellen if she could maybe summarize some of the decision points that come into play when we're picking those comp communities, what your methodology is for doing that. And the reason I'm asking that is because I know that you have been, and so far in our conversations, you've been very willing to almost go beyond what I would consider to be the minimum level of our sample size. So for instance, we were talking about what are the general communities that best match us, and how do you measure that from town to town? And I was quite impressed with GovHR's ability to sort of set those metrics and come up with a numeric score, so you can kind of quantify that somehow. And then also to expand that to see if there's overlap between our general survey and the communities that specifically have a light plant within them. So your willingness to sort of go beyond those basic community stats and then delve a little bit deeper for us so that we can see if there's a match between the light plant communities and our metrics. So could you just touch upon really how we're coming down to what those communities will look like and how you determine what becomes a part of our sample group?
You're muted.
I know. So as I mentioned, we always look at population and proximity as two criteria, but the remaining are financial. So what we'll do, say for your total assessed value, we have a ranking. So there's a factor that you have your total assessed value, and then there's factors related to that. 1.5 times, 2 times, 2.5 times, 3 times. So for a community that's total assessed value is within 1.5 times, either lower or higher than Concord's, that's going to receive the highest points. And then as the factor gets further away, there's less points. So we do that for the 8 criteria that we have in our system in order to determine comparability. So we've done that already. But where the conversation then went yesterday was, well, how do we deal with the light plant? Because there are a few that are in the top. I think our cutoff was about 80 points or higher, if I recall. But we need more than that. So then I said, well, why don't, and there are several more that have light plants that you've compared to in the past that we did determine comparability, but they were below the cutoff. And then there's other communities that we did not include because either they were too far away, too high of a population, too low of a population, that I said, let's go back and go back to the last study that you did that had these communities, I believe it was your last study, that had all these light plants and run all those communities through the matrix. So I actually did that. Well, I didn't run it through yet, but of those, there were 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 more that are not already on the list in one fashion or another that we're going to run through to see what they look like. And then once we know what the results are, then we can see if we could come up with, obviously the top comps are going to be surveyed for the light plant, but we may take a little bit of a different approach and go a little bit further down on the list to bring in some more communities specific to the light plant. So if our cutoff, is 80 points or greater for our top comps, we may go lower for the light plant, and that's okay. That's why we're running them through our matrix, because every community has a measure of comparability. The question is, how comparable are they? So that's the next discussion we have to have, is to say, okay, well, where do we want to go with this? Because this is who you looked at before. Do we still want to use those, or do we want to use some of those? And so we're in process with that now. So does that answer your question, Kelly?
Yes, thank you very much. And the reason I brought that up as well is because based on what Amy has told us, the scope of the personnel board in this respect will be important. So we might want to bring this back to the next meeting through the chair. We might want to bring this back as an agenda item for the next meeting so that there's some affirmation or recognition of what those comp communities will look like before we start on this path. Thank you, Joellen. Appreciate that.
Before we entertain any other public comments, Mark Howell has talked a little bit about the strategic focus of this kind of effort, because there is a need clearly at a global level to take a look at what are the factors for attracting and retaining employees. The bottom line is the town needs resources in order to operate. There really are, in my judgment, several different areas or tactics that are involved with accomplishing that goal. And over time, the personnel board, certainly I see becoming a little bit more involved and in depth with exploring these. Right now, the personnel board has on its plate very shortly the recommendations from the Personnel Study Task Force to deal with, and that's all in connection with the next town meeting, whether or not there will be any bylaw change. Certainly, that's a fairly time-consuming, will be, I think, time-consuming. But I think the areas that I'm looking at that we need to, from the personnel board standpoint, keeping and attracting employees, clearly compensation classification is important. Benefits, I think, are important. The kind of training, management training, employee training that is offered and available. I don't know what is offered and available. I think the personnel board should be able to explore that. Recognition, what kind of recognition programs? What recognition, in fact, is currently being offered to employees? And maybe finally, career growth. People leave jobs, especially, they can have the greatest boss, they can get the most money, and it all has to do with the career growth, and they want to do something more than they can do now. They want something that's more responsible. And career growth is one of those intangibles that plays into why people leave jobs. So these various areas need to be explored by the personnel board, in my opinion. And I see us doing that, but I don't see us doing it all at once over a short period of time, because I think the focus has got to be on the personnel board's involvement, review of the compensation classification study, the personnel study task force recommendation in terms of the new personnel bylaw, But that's at least sort of my thinking on this. Any other comments from the citizens before we move on? Okay, not hearing or seeing it. Oh, go ahead. Yes, Liz.
Oh, so as a personnel board member, not as a public citizen, so I jumped the gun a bit, maybe, Bill. But I do definitely agree with what you just stated, that there's a lot of work that, we'll see the recommendations from the personnel task force, et cetera. And I think that you're right, that there's an order to this, because this will impact the work that Joellen and the team is going to do, is really going to impact those other sort of what I think of as cultural factors, about, retaining and finding new employees, looking at levels of satisfaction, et cetera. And whatever statement might be made now about levels of satisfaction would change based on this work. So there is a kind of order to how you need to do these things, which I think we should pay attention to.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'm thinking that if we have exhausted Joellen for purposes of giving us a sense about the classification and compensation, we can certainly thank her for her interest in tackling Concord and providing her expertise and that of her team. And I think then the personnel board can then focus a little bit before we go to the next agenda item, to focus on the approach for confirming what data is going to be used. And I think Kelly has, very nicely framed that for us. So any other questions of Joellen before we tell her good night? All right. Thank you, Joellen. Very,
You're
very
welcome.
good.
All right, have a good
Looking forward.
evening.
Looking forward to working with you for sure.
Me too. Good night.
Okay, I think we should tackle the question that Amy raised at the beginning in terms of what we should be thinking about. The approach for confirming what data will be used, the approach for confirming what municipalities would be considered comparable. Does it, Nancy or Liz, do you have any of your thoughts in terms of what our approach should be on that topic, on that question?
I'm not sure what, could you just say that again?
Well, Amy suggested that the board needs to think about how does it want to confirm what data we're going to get from which municipalities, perhaps even the benchmark jobs that are going to be asked of the comparable communities. I heard her say that, one thing is we have another meeting. I think Kelly sort of entertained that as maybe a good idea. The other alternative that Amy presented was, leave it up to the chair to make the final decision. So I'm looking to see from the other board members what your thoughts are in terms of what perhaps would be the best option here, or the best approach.
I don't know if I have an answer to that right now. I just, I think that Amy was particularly looking at, bylaw 5 and bylaw 6.
Right.
And so I would assume that we'd also spend some time on them. I don't think we're going to get much information from HR, Joellen, for a while. I do know that we have to prepare for basically what would be coming up at town meeting and what we would need to do. So.
Well, I think, Nancy, you're right. I mean, what we're going to get some, I'm going to call it guidance, or we're going to get the recommendation from the study task force. And we'll have to see what that is, because that will set in motion the need for the personnel board to come up with a plan. Now, that plan is going to be composed by the three of us, the three of us will be responsible for coming up with what the plan should be and look like, and
Right.
actually providing, I think, some idea timelines. And because, as far as the select board is concerned, they're looking for some potential action as to will there be a recommendation to change the personnel bylaw or not? If there is
Right,
one,
and
what's it going to look like? So
And I
there's
think
a
that's
lot of
coming up.
work. There's a
Right,
lot of
and
work.
I think that's coming up fairly soon. I think they
Right.
want it, so I think we'll have an idea of what our goals will be once we hear what they have to say.
Right.
So,
Bill,
Yes.
I wonder, would it be helpful if I bring up on the screen the personnel bylaw so we can look at the section that talks
Sure.
about the comparable communities and
Sure.
all? Okay.
right. Also, Amy, did you have any update or discussion from the task force yet?
No, I don't hear from the task force, so I don't.
Okay.
Okay, can you see my screen and that scrolling?
Yep.
Okay,
Okay.
so again, in the personnel bylaw, the personnel board is responsible for the classification and compensation plan. The classification plan really is about how positions are grouped. We do have factors right now. That's when you look at the schedule and you see, is it a grade, 1, 2, 3, that sort of thing. And then the compensation plan are salary ranges and establishing the ranges from which we work in. The bylaw has a few things that I thought were important to focus on tonight to make sure we're on the right track. So under the classification piece, we've got that there needs to be a uniform system for grouping positions based on the nature and complexity of the duties assigned and minimum qualifications required to perform those duties. And that's what we've contracted with Joellen's firm to provide, and she's been describing that. And I would just, touching base to make sure that you are comfortable with the way we are proceeding before we go too far with that we have a system for that. So that would be my first piece that I'm checking in on. Shall I pause there and see if you have any comment, or do you want me to keep going on the other pieces?
Well, it might be important. This has not been scripted or anything, but I think, I think it might be important that the board members, if they're okay or they feel comfortable with what is stated in that first paragraph under 5.1, so that it's clear that we are, as a board, committed to moving ahead with Gov HR to do the work that they're going to do.
Right. Yeah.
So I'm going to assume, if Nancy or Liz, if either of you have any issue with that first paragraph, that now's the time to voice what that concern is, and we can discuss that. But okay, so I think
It seems quite clear that this is exactly what the RFP focused on, and how Gov HR
Right.
came in to do this work. So it doesn't seem to be a conflict in any way, unless I'm misunderstanding or misreading something.
No, you're not. And Amy, I want to make certain, because we didn't. You're looking for the board to be comfortable with what is stated there in section 5 and section 6. Is that your objective?
I want to make sure that you feel that Gov HR is on track to provide that system. So we already have a contract with Gov HR. They're going to do it. They've just outlined for you the system. And I just want to know along the way that you understand how we're meeting the obligations of the bylaw and your role. So you don't necessarily have to act on that, but if there were any concerns, then I already had that, what Joellen's showing isn't the right uniform system for grouping positions, or that you wanted her to tweak that in some way. It would be helpful to hear that early on, as we go. But I think we've contracted her services and approach, and now you've seen it in more detail. So
Right. I'm very comfortable with everything that she put out, particularly today after listening to her too. So I think that our goals in 5.1 and then 6.1, 6.3, I mean, all of 5 and 6, I'm hoping that from what I hear from her and see what she's written, is that we will be able to meet those goals.
And you mentioned 6.3, which was the most important one, I think, for this meeting that I did want to make sure we go back to. Because as the data gathering starts, we have to make sure that you're comfortable with the approach for that. And as you can see here, say it's it shall be a responsibility of the personnel board to review rates of pay at least every 3 years. And I don't think that's a full class and comp study every 3 years, is not the way that it has been interpreted as I understood it or applied, but reviewing the rates, which is why every year we look at the rates and make recommendations related to updates. But whenever the board reviews the compensation plan, it shall take into account and give such weight as it may deem appropriate to the following: rates of pay for like positions in Massachusetts towns considered by the personnel board to be comparable to Concord. That's the number one thing I wanted to make sure at this stage, how we're going to confirm which towns you think are comparable to Concord, because the plan is to use them and is to use a list of them as Joellen described, and we'll be finalizing that. So I want to know the approach for how we finalize the comparable communities that we're gathering data from. Then another factor that can be given weight as the board deems appropriate is rates of pay for like jobs in commercial and business establishments in the area of Concord and vicinity. And Joellen has been talking about private sector, or where that's relevant, or what other ways we might get information. And I want to be sure if we're all in the same place there. The last one, the current level of consumer price index for urban wage earners and clerical workers, Boston, Massachusetts. That really comes to play usually when we're updating the plan on an annual basis. And there are different thoughts on how much that even influences it. But we take that into consideration annually, along with what we're seeing for other community COLAs, cost of living adjustments, that sort of thing. So I don't think that is as important right now. That's not something that we're talking about. And but we do need to be sure we're on the right track for A and B. Did that make
Right.
sense?
I think that's very, very helpful. Thanks, Amy.
So
Amy?
I just have a comment. I think, Amy, as you just described it, and I'm trying to get it all in the notes, but I'll cut and paste from this document, okay, in the minutes. So you'll see exactly what we're talking about, not my gibberish typing. But I do think the two that the first two should take into account rates of pay in comparable towns, and also rates of pay in commercial establishments in these communities. So those are things that we did just discuss with Joellen, and they certainly are taking that into consideration. I'd like to, at our next meeting, to have more explanation, maybe a spreadsheet that shows the communities they're recommending and the criteria that they've used. So this isn't their first time to do this, so I'm sure that they already have communities that are rated through their rating system, and it would be good to understand more specific about those ratings, so we can say with confidence that we agree with that. As she outlined it, it sounded very good, but I'd love to see the details so we can really look at the nitty-gritty comparisons of different towns, communities in the area. And then the last, the consumer price index and so forth. Obviously we're at a time, in a moment in the history of our country, where this is a very big deal, right? With COVID and all that's happened to our economy, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that will lead us into, that piece that will come later, where we try to understand the culture and the climate of the workers satisfaction levels, et cetera, in town, and what we can do about that. So consumer price index, I understand why you'd say that that is, taken a bit differently, because this community in particular is so expensive to live here. I mean, this is a difficulty across the board, right? So but on the other side of that is that town employees used to live in town and now they don't, and that is a satisfaction issue that I'm not sure we can solve it, certainly, but I think we do have to have that kind of discussion at some point. So I just wanted to put a flag on that, and understanding that for me, that's where that bifurcation, I agree with you, Amy, that there's a separate way to approach that, but I think we have to take seriously that last piece, and as we go forward and see where Gov HR takes us, and what that then implies for our next step. So that's all I have. Thanks.
All right, I think those are excellent comments. Two thoughts. Number one is, I think 6.3, we as a personnel board should look at perhaps editing that in the future. Obviously, this is the document. These A, B, and C are the elements, items that currently exist because of town meeting. These are the ones that have been approved. Any changes to this document of any shape or form has to be ratified by the town meeting. So we're set. We're set with this particular paragraph, 6.3 for right now.
Yeah.
Going forward, obviously, we as a personnel board can recommend changes. So that's point number one, is I'd like to think of, and there's other sections, by the way, as well, but the Personnel Study Task Force may help us guide us in that direction as well. I think that we should have at our next meeting exactly the kind of information or spreadsheet that is possible to create on the factors and based on the towns. Now, the issue I can see here is we've got a meeting scheduled 1 week from today, but we have another agenda item, and I'm concerned that, are we going to have enough time to add the review of the comparable data matrix, what towns are being used in that meeting or not? And I guess I'm concerned that it's just going to be too much. So if it's going to be too much, then we're going to have to figure out, okay, so what's plan B? And which is sort of needing another meeting. So any thoughts or comments about my concern that we already have an agenda item for next meeting next week, and that adding this particular review analysis is going to be too much?
I guess the first question, Bill, to answer you would be to say, when does GovHR think they'll be ready with that spreadsheet? Is it too soon for them, or is next week? Oh, Kelly? Yeah.
Yes, if I may, thank you. We already have, I think we have a list of, or the initial study and the criteria. We already have a list that is going. So we've already discussed one, and what we've discussed since then is possibly adding new titles to that, or new communities to that, based on the conversation we had. What Joellen was saying earlier was that she's already analyzed some of the additional ones. So I think we're going to be ready. We'll definitely have that information ready for you. If anything, I could see us maybe distributing the information in enough time that you can sort of, look at it independently, because you can't speak about it with each other outside of a meeting, but we can certainly be in a position where we can get the information from Joellen, distribute it to individuals so that you can have time to review it in advance of the next meeting, and then ask any questions that you have, either through, just return your questions to me or to Amy, and we'll make sure we have those answers by the time that you're ready to meet. And I guess I would, as the close for that, I would suggest that There was some discussion at prior meetings, and I can't recall if we ever closed the loop on this. There was discussion as to whether or not there could or should be a standing monthly meeting. So since we're talking about the topic of should we add another meeting, that might be a good segue into, if you want to set up a meeting and then we say, you as a board decide at the next meeting, okay, we're going to do the third Wednesday of every month. This might be the right time to do it. But I guess the bottom line is that I think that we will be ready to distribute the information to you. You'll have time to review it. And then we kind of, discuss it at the next meeting. You can either codify it then or send us back to the drawing board and we can answer those questions with the consultant directly. But we'll be ready. We'll have the information for you.
All right. Liz, does that answer what you were, okay, yeah. Nancy, any thoughts from you in terms of?
No, that's fine. That sounds perfect for us to be able to get it ahead of time and review it.
So I guess then what we have right now is is two major agenda items for next week. Is that, do you think, doable, Amy?
I think it is, depending, there'll probably have to be some decisions at that meeting, whether any pieces get continued or how to move forward. I think we could look to see if there are any other dates that you could meet, but I think, as you all know, that's been pretty challenging to find the dates. I would like to have a more frequent schedule. I think that even something more than once a month is going to be very helpful in the coming months. So, but that has proven to be a bit difficult. So anyway, that's beyond your question, Bill, but I would like to continue looking to see if we can carve out another backup time close to the meeting that we have. It will be helpful to know how much time you all have next week. And yes, I think we can manage the agenda schedule.
All right. Is it possible, Amy, that, I mean, you've been so good about sending out the necessary information about, and I guess there's that software, the meeting software, which one is that now? I can't.
I've tried a couple to see, but Doodle or SurveyMonkey. I've tried a few methods now.
Okay, well, I think maybe it's Doodle. I think it may be more user friendly, but I would suggest that you send that out for September. So at least we have an updated. I mean, I know when I'm going to be gone now in September, which I didn't know a week ago. And so I think it might be helpful for us as a group, as a body, and for you, Amy, and you, Kelly, to know what you're dealing with. I mean, it's one of the unfortunate realities of only having three of us, which means we have to have three people in attendance to have a quorum. So I'm going to suggest to Liz and Nancy that we let Amy do another doodle for the month of September, and see if we can't.
That sounds good. I also think, you're right, Amy, we'll probably need more than one meeting a month for the duration or for key area points in this study. But trying to set up, a day of the week, second Tuesday or whatever, maybe we could try that again on Doodle as well. I think the summer was a little tricky with schedules and departures, but maybe we can be more accommodating to your efforts in that way.
Sorry.
Yeah, and sorry, I had one other question, and Kelly, it was to your comment that you could send out information about that spreadsheet. And I see, we do have a lot of tonight folks on the phone that aren't on the committee, which is terrific. Is there a way that they would be able to get that information if they wanted to continue to support the work of the committee? How does that work? Oh, you're on mute, Kelly.
Doesn't matter how long I've been using Zoom, I keep doing that. Yes, I'll speak with Amy about the best way to do that. I did jot down some of the names so that if one of us has their contact information, or we can put it in a publicly accessible place so that people can, actually, you know what, I'm gonna talk about this more with Amy. Perhaps there's a place on the site so that we can keep the public informed about the process and what the plan, what the personnel board is approving, and when they do that. Let us put our heads together. By the next meeting, we'll have some recommendations on how to get out the word, not just for this meeting and this information, but moving forward.
Okay.
And I'll just say, I think at a minimum, we should definitely put it with an agenda that
Yeah.
meeting, you know, the agenda was being formed still. I was working with some employees to make sure what we could do, but I think getting that up with a preliminary packet, and we can do an amended packet as needed. And then I like the idea of having, you know, a central site as well, Kelly, like
Yeah.
we're trying to do.
Another thought is, I know that there's a listserv through Civic Plus, so that when we have meeting minutes or a meeting agenda that's posted, those will automatically be forwarded to folks. So what we might be able to do is encourage people to sign up for that listserv so that they can get them automatically. So we'll think of some strategies to get out the word. Thank you for that suggestion.
Okay, good. You know, notwithstanding that I don't think we have any more public comment before us.
You
Okay.
do now.
Oh, all right.
Hi, Bill, Ned Perry, 362 Bedford Street. Thank you all for the great work that you're doing, and congratulations, Mr. Chair, for really raising a number of issues that the personnel board should have been addressing and should be addressing all along. I hear you saying that you have trouble getting a quorum. As you may know, 20 years ago, the personnel board increased their numbers from 3 to 5, specifically because of the trouble they were having during the summer of getting a quorum. I would encourage each of you to find a fourth and a fifth member. I have a prospective member, maybe a little bit close to Ms. Cobb's former world, but that's probably not all bad. I hope you'll end up having 5 people in the near future. Relative to the classification compensation comparable towns, back in 2007, I believe it was the last time we did a system-wise class and comp when I was town moderator. And there was a good list. We were high on the totem pole of municipal employers at that time. I would hope that that list could be circulated along with the proposed list. And if there are any towns that are taken off as not comparable, I would be interested to know why we have perhaps fallen below their comparability. And maybe that, I don't want to expand your agenda for the next meeting, but at the meeting when you're discussing the comparable towns, I think it might be interesting for the personnel board to understand what changes have been made from 2007 to the present time. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for this opportunity to comment.
Thank you, Mr. Perry. Any other,
Can I-
Liz, you have a comment?
Yeah, I think that's a really helpful comment. First, thanks to Ned also for joining and spending the time, because I think this kind of community engagement is so important. But then this last comment I think is really interesting, because it does set us up well to look at how are we doing as a town, and how is the community and that culture, how, you know, as we move in beyond to the next stages of really looking at our hiring and retention and where the town fits in its reputation, if you will. I think that would be a really interesting thing to see where we were in the past, where other towns were, and then kind of flip the work that GovHR is doing so that we're saying, and well, what does that mean about us as a town now? And that'll give us kind of a baseline to look at any kind of changes in that ranking, if it's ranking that where we fit. I think that would be an interesting thing to do, which probably, I mean, if we had the two different lists, the list that GovHR is providing on that spreadsheet, Kelly, that you're talking about, and if there's a former list that is available publicly, to have those side by side would be, I'd find that very curious as a new member of the community and understanding more about, how Concord and what Concord is about, that sounds really fascinating. Okay, I'll stop. Thank you.
Okay, I think we're ready to move on to the next agenda item, which is the Personnel Task Force. I don't know, I know that Terry Ackerman was one of the people on the call. I don't know if she's still there or not. She is the liaison, not only to the Personnel Board, but also to the Personnel Task Force. Is there any update that would be appropriate for you to share with us, Terry?
I'm not sure that I know exactly, and perhaps Amy or someone else knows, but there was an employee forum scheduled for, well, not just employees, but a public forum was supposed to be held on Monday, and it's been moved to September 12th at 1 p.m. I see Kelly nodding, so Kelly, please jump in. So I think for sure the Personnel Board should be aware of this and plan to attend. I think it'll be held at CMLP. And this is an opportunity for the Personnel Study Task Force to briefly talk about their report and get comments from the employees and the public. And then after that, they're going to finalize the report and come to a select board meeting, possibly as early as September 19th.
Okay.
And I think it was Nancy who asked a question about this earlier in the meeting, but I didn't quite hear your question.
What I had asked is, did Amy hear anything from the task force?
Okay.
I was wondering if we had any information about where they were at and what they had to say, anything like that.
Right. Okay. So, no, they're going to present it on September 12th. And
Okay.
as I understand it, the presentation will be really brief and it's mostly an opportunity for questions. And I think the Personnel Board might have a lot of really excellent questions, like recommendations for changing the bylaw. Why do you want to make those changes? Who's going to make those changes? How did you come to these conclusions? Whatever you want to ask. This is going to be a great opportunity to ask those questions.
You're absolutely right, Terry. Absolutely. Kelly, did you have something to add to this conversation?
No, I just heard the date of the September 19th, but I believe that the town manager may have, if there's more information, I'll make sure that it gets out. But that's all I knew. I was just affirming that it is on the 19th because it was rescheduled.
Wait a minute. I thought this public forum was on the 12th. And then they may go to the select board as early as the 19th, or it may get moved to October, but the important for the Personnel Board to show up.
The 12th is what the town manager had advised. The time and location wasn't confirmed. I had forwarded to the Personnel Board members the notice of it, so please check your email if you haven't seen that. But I had noticed that there wasn't mention of the time and place. I think it may be the same as it was for the canceled meeting, but we're waiting for confirmation.
Yeah,
Okay, I'm
we'll
confused
confirm that.
then. Yeah, I'm confused about it then too. So if you can include me in the email correspondence, I appreciate it. I definitely want to attend.
Yeah, I had it for the 19th, but I could be mistaken. Perhaps I just put it in on the wrong date. So I will definitely get back to, or someone will get back to everyone to confirm the date, location, and time.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Terry. I think the only thing, and we're not going to spend any time tonight on this, but the reason why this meeting was essentially canceled and rescheduled may at some time deserve some discussion, but not now. We're ready to, I guess, go to the minutes. Everybody, the minutes of June 16th, 2022. We have two sets, June 16th and July 21st. And I certainly do want to thank Liz for doing this work. This is very critical for us as a board to, I think, note the important item points. Certainly have a good sense about the action items, if there happen to be any, and what we're looking at for the future. So anyway, thank you, Liz, again. So I'll entertain a motion unless, any questions or comments regarding the content of the June 16th minutes?
No,
Okay,
No
that's,
comments.
let's, we'll do I need a motion to approve the June 16th, 2022 minutes, and then a second,
okay.
and then we'll vote.
I make a motion that we approve the minutes, meeting minutes of June 16th, 2022.
All right, is there a second?
I second.
Okay, all in favor, Bill Marachek, yes, Nancy Crowley, yes, and
Yes.
Liz?
Yes.
Now we've got to look at the July 21st,
Right.
2022 minutes, draft minutes. Any comments, suggestions, edits?
No. Nope.
No, not
No.
not seeing any. I'll entertain a motion to approve these minutes.
Okay. All right, I will make a motion to approve the minutes of July 21st, 2022.
Okay.
And I'll
is there-
second.
All right, good first, moved and seconded. All in favor of approving the July 21st, Nancy Crowley, raised hand, Liz is a raised hand. and then-
Aye.
Yes, so I think, any other items or anything that anybody wants to mention since we have concluded our
No.
meeting? Before we,
I would like, yeah, I would just like to say, Liz, I must say you did a beautiful job on the minutes. Seriously, you're absolutely terrific. And so I'm glad you're doing them instead of me. So
well,
that's all I have to say.
I
Well,
was-
that's very kind of you. I think I'm behind because on the joint policy task force, our meeting, I should have put out the minutes for that. And I haven't, so I apologize. But that's why I wanted to make sure I got everything tonight. So I'll try to do that within the next 24 to 48 hours and send those to you, Amy. And make sure that we really get these posted more in a timely manner. So I apologize. This summer was an awkward time for me to start with the minutes, I think, but
Well-
Nancy, you're very kind to think that they actually went okay.
I thought
And
they were
I
wonderful.
just promised to get better.
That's very kind. I was thinking that, Liz, you would be we might be able to have a personnel board having a money-making source here in which we use you as a consultant for other town boards, and we can, I mean.
We don't want to lose her, Bill. We don't want to lose her doing our minutes. That's the
Oh,
important
okay,
thing.
right. That's
You gotta think of
Forgot
that.
about that.
you
So,
know. Don't
I
be
guess-
crowding her out too soon.
okay, no.
Don't worry, I'm a very loyal person. I started with you all, I'll stick here, okay?
Okay.
Nancy, flattery will get you everywhere when you get a good note taker.
So I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
I second.
Okay. I'll
You-
make a motion that we adjourn. Yeah,
And we have a second.
Oh, then I seconded
All in
first,
favor?
okay.
at 6:58. There we
All right,
go.
and all in favor of the three of us. So
Okay,
we'll see you.
thanks so much,
in a
everybody.
week.
All right.
Okay.